The expansive halls of the Zytherian flagship, Luminous Sentinel, thrummed with quiet precision. Its crew, disciplined and efficient, glided through its corridors like threads in a vast, living tapestry. Bioluminescent tendrils of hair cast an otherworldly glow upon walls of polished obsidian alloy, creating an aura of surreal majesty. At the command center, Captain Nomé Veyna stood at attention, her posture stiff as the holographic council's projection flickered before her. The assembled members of the Galactic Concord gazed down, their varied alien visages radiating authority. The eldest among them, a grizzled drawn known as Magistrate Thalver, spoke with a voice like grinding granite. Captain Veyna, Thalver intoned, his three piercing eyes locking onto hers. We entrust you with a mission of utmost gravity. A human on the primitive planet, Earth, has been tampering with quantum resonance. His experiments endanger the delicate equilibrium of space-time. Nomé saluted sharply, her every movement precise. Understood, Magistrate. The target will be apprehended. The holographic feed shifted to display a dossier. An image of a human male with tousled hair, crooked glasses, and a perpetually mischievous grin. His appearance clashed with the gravitas of the situation. This is Dr. Theo Grayson, Thalver continued, disdain threading his tone. Do not be deceived by his disheveled exterior. He is a threat to galactic stability. Nomé squinted at the image. He looks harmless. Another counselor, an Aurelian crystalline entity named Seraph, spoke, her voice chiming like wind through glass. Harmlessness is often a guise. Proceed with caution, Captain. As the transmission ended, Nomé turned to her ship's AI, Prism, a hovering sphere of shifting light renowned for its irreverent commentary. Well, Prism, Nomé said with a resigned sigh. What's your analysis? Prism's voice crackled to life, brimming with sarcasm. My analysis is that the Council's overreacting. That guy looks like he'd lose a fight with a toaster. Nomé suppressed a smirk. Orders are orders. Set a course for Earth. On it, Prism replied. But don't blame me when we discover he's accidentally turned a blender into a black hole generator. The journey to Earth was uneventful, save for Prism's constant critiques of human culture. Did you know, Prism mused, humans consume entertainment by watching others argue over slices of pizza? They call it reality television. Explain to me how they're a viable species. Nomé arched a brow. And this is relevant to the mission because... Context, Captain. Always context. As the ship slipped into Earth's orbit, its cloaking systems engaged, rendering it invisible to the planet's primitive sensors. Nomé reviewed Theo's dossier again, noting the chaotic scrawls in his research notes, equations interspersed with doodles of cats, sandwiches, and nonsensical diagrams. Humans, she muttered. How do they even function? Prism's laughter filled the chamber. Poorly, if history's any indicator. Nomé sighed. Let's just get this over with. The ship descended unnoticed, landing in a clearing near Theo's lab. The sleek craft, resembling a shard of midnight glass, shimmered briefly before vanishing from sight. Inside the lab, Dr. Theo Grayson hunched over a device that looked like a cross between a coffee maker and a particle accelerator. His orange tabby, Newton, lay sprawled on the counter, swatting lazily at a roll of duct tape. Okay, Newt, Theo muttered, adjusting a knob. If this works, we'll have unlimited clean energy. And if it doesn't, well, we might need to relocate to Mars. The contraption emitted a worrying whine, and Theo grabbed a fire extinguisher just as the lab door burst open. Standing in the doorway was Nomé, her shimmering armor gleaming in the dim light, her glowing hair casting an ethereal halo. Theo Grayson, she declared, her voice firm and commanding. By order of the Galactic Concord, you are under arrest. Theo blinked, utterly baffled. Can this wait? My quantum reactor's about to. A loud pop interrupted him, followed by a puff of smoke. Newton hissed and darted under a table while Theo flailed with a fire extinguisher. Nomé stared at the scene, unimpressed. This, she said dryly, is the threat to space-time? Theo turned to her, his glasses askew. Look, lady, I don't know who you are or what beef you have with physics, but I'm kind of busy saving the world here. Prism's voice crackled in Nomé's communicator. Called it. 5 minutes in, and he's already on fire. Ignoring the AI, Nomé stepped forward. You're coming with me, human. Resist, and I'll use force. Theo raised his hands, the fire extinguisher still in one of them. Okay, no need to go full space cop on me. But can I at least bring my cat? Newton, as if on cue, leapt onto Nomé's shoulder, curling up as though it were his rightful throne. Nomé froze, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. Prism burst into laughter. Oh, this is priceless. Galactic Concord's finest, defeated by a house cat. Theo smirked. Looks like he likes you. Congrats, you've been chosen. Nomé scowled, attempting to dislodge Newton, but the cat swatted her hand and settled back down. This is highly irregular, she muttered. Welcome to Earth, Theo said with a shrug. Nothing here is regular. As the reactor emitted another ominous hum, Nomé realized her mission was about to spiral into chaos. And perhaps something else entirely. Chapter 2, Chaos in the Stars. Theo's head swiveled as the Luminous Sentinel's sleek interior unfolded before him. The bioluminescent walls glowed with alien elegance, pulsating in shades of aquamarine and violet. Newton sat contentedly on Nomé's shoulder, purring like he owned the ship, while Prism's glowing orb floated beside them, its swirling lights dimming and brightening in rhythm with its commentary. Let me get this straight, Theo said, clutching his half-empty coffee mug. You're taking me to space jail because my little gadget— Your unstable gadget, Nomé interrupted, her tone sharp. Theo rolled his eyes. Fine. My unstable gadget might, bend spacetime too much? Create some funky wormhole. It could collapse an entire star system, Nomé replied icily. You're lucky I was sent instead of a neutralizer squad. Charming, Theo muttered, glancing at Newton, who nuzzled Nomé's glowing hair. Why is my cat so relaxed about all this? Shouldn't he be freaking out about being abducted by aliens? Prism chimed in, its voice dripping with mock seriousness. Maybe he's smarter than you and realizes there's no point resisting. Nomé shot Prism a glare. Stay focused. We need to transport the prisoner safely to the Galactic Concord for a tribunal. Prisoner? Tribunal? Theo said, raising an eyebrow. Okay, Captain Buzzkill, maybe you've forgotten, but I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was trying to save humanity. Unlimited clean energy. No more pollution. No more fighting over resources. You nearly vaporized half your lab. Nomé interrupted, turning to face him. If your idea of saving humanity is blowing up your own planet, then you're doing an exceptional job. Theo opened his mouth to retort, but stopped as they entered the ship's control room. The view of space sprawled out before him, a tapestry of stars so vivid and infinite it stole the breath from his lungs. Wow, he murmured, his usual sarcasm melting into genuine awe. This is incredible. Nomé glanced at him, her expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again. Don't get used to it. Prism's lights brightened, clearly enjoying the moment. I'll let him have this one, Captain. It's probably the first time he's ever seen anything more advanced than duct tape and bad decisions. Theo smirked, finding himself oddly charmed by the AI's relentless sass. You're good at this, aren't you? Did they program you specifically to roast people, or is that just a happy accident? I'm multifunctional, Prism replied, spinning in a flourish of light. I roast, analyze, and navigate. A triple threat, if you will. Nomé groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. Both of you stop. Prism, plot the course to the Concord station. And Theo, sit down before you do something else catastrophic. Fine, Theo said, raising his hands in mock surrender. He slid into the nearest chair, which immediately adjusted to his frame. At least this thing's comfortable. Nomé ignored him, focusing on the control console. She input commands with precision, her glowing hair reflecting the streams of data flowing across the screens. Newton leapt down from her shoulder and curled up on the console, his tail flicking lazily. Theo watched her for a moment, his earlier irritation fading. You're really serious about this whole Galactic Cop thing, huh? Nomé didn't look at him. It's not a thing. It's my duty. The Concord exists to protect the galaxy from reckless individuals like you. Reckless? Theo said, leaning forward. Do you have any idea how many tests I ran on that reactor? How many sleepless nights I spent making sure it wouldn't blow up? Clearly not enough, Nomé retorted, finally turning to glare at him. Before Theo could respond, the ship jolted violently, throwing both of them off balance. Newton leapt back onto Nomé's shoulder, claws digging into her armor for stability. What the hell was that? Theo shouted, gripping the edges of his seat. Prism's voice buzzed, unusually tense. We're being pursued. Unidentified ship on an intercept course. They're not broadcasting a Concord signal. Nomé's jaw tightened. Pirates? Pirates? Theo exclaimed. You have space pirates? Of course, you have space pirates. Why wouldn't you? Ignoring him, Nomé barked orders. Prism, activate shields. Prepare evasive maneuvers. The Luminous Sentinel surged forward, its engines roaring to life. The pursuing ship, a jagged, cobbled-together vessel that looked like it had been scavenged from a dozen different wrecks, appeared on the view screen, firing bright bursts of plasma at them. Theo gripped his seat tighter as the ship shook under the impact of the blasts. Is this the part where I say, I told you so, about arresting me being a bad idea? Nomé shot him a glare. Not helping, Prism's voice crackled. Their weapons are crude but persistent. If they land a direct hit, it'll breach the aft section. Nomé's hands flew across the console. Divert power to the rear shields. Prepare to engage countermeasures. Theo watched her work, a mix of fear and fascination bubbling inside him. Despite the chaos, she remained composed, her every action deliberate. It was impressive, infuriatingly so. The ship jolted again, and Prism's voice grew sharper. They're targeting the stabilizers. If they take them out, we'll be dead in the void. Can't this fancy ship fight back? Theo yelled. Nomé gritted her teeth. Prism, deploy the plasma mines. Deploying. Prism confirmed, its light dimming momentarily as the mines were released. The pursuing ship swerved to avoid the glowing orbs now scattered in its path, but one detonated near its starboard side, sending it spinning. Direct hit. Prism reported, its tone smug. Nomé exhaled slowly, her hands relaxing on the console. Good. Keep an eye on them. If they come back, I want to know. Theo slumped back in his chair, his heart still pounding. Okay, I take it back. You might be slightly more competent than I thought. Nomé ignored him, standing and adjusting her armor. Prism, maintain our course. Let me know if there's any further interference. Will do, Captain. She turned to Theo, her expression unreadable. We'll reach the Concord station in a few hours. Stay out of my way until then. Theo held up his hands. Hey, no complaints here. I'll just sit tight and let you do your space cop thing. But as Nomé walked away, Theo couldn't help but watch her, a strange mixture of respect and curiosity blooming in his chest. For the first time, he wondered if there was more to her than the cold, calculating exterior she projected. And for the first time, Nomé found herself wondering the same about him. Chapter 3. Escape Velocity. The silence inside the Luminous Sentinel felt heavy, broken only by the low hum of the ship's engines. Theo sat at the edge of his seat in the observation deck, his gaze fixed on the endless sprawl of stars outside. Newton snoozed in his lap, utterly unfazed by the fact that his human had been arrested by an alien and nearly obliterated by pirates in the span of an afternoon. Theo stroked the cat absently, his thoughts swirling. Nomé had barely spoken to him since the pirate attack, her tone curt and her focus unwavering. He wasn't sure whether to be impressed by her dedication or annoyed by her complete lack of humanity, or, well, whatever the Xenon equivalent was. Prisoner, came Nomé's voice, cutting through his musings. Theo turned to see her standing in the doorway, her battle armor shimmering faintly in the dim light. She looked as composed as ever, though her bioluminescent hair seemed to glow brighter, a subtle sign of agitation. I have a name, you know, Theo said, leaning back in his chair. You can call me Theo, or Dr. Walker if you want to be formal about it. Nomé crossed her arms. I'm not here to exchange pleasantries. I need to know more about your reactor. What exactly were you trying to accomplish? He arched an eyebrow. I thought you read my file. I did. It was incomplete. Theo sighed, gently moving Newton off his lap before standing. Fine. If you must know, I was working on a way to stabilize quantum resonance fields to generate clean, infinite energy. No more fossil fuels, no more nuclear waste, just pure, limitless power. And you thought it was wise to experiment without proper safeguards? Gnome shot back. I had safeguards, Theo said defensively. Just not galactic-level safeguards, apparently. Nomé's expression didn't soften. Your ignorance nearly caused irreparable damage to space-time. Theo threw up his hands. How was I supposed to know that? You're the ones with the fancy starships and AI. Maybe if your Galactic Council bothered to share its advanced science instead of playing interstellar hall monitor, this whole mess wouldn't have happened. For the first time, Gnome hesitated. The faint glow in her hair dimmed slightly, and her lips pressed into a thin line. The Concord exists to maintain balance, she said finally. Interference with underdeveloped civilizations is strictly prohibited. Theo snorted. Yeah, because that's working so well. You swoop in after the fact, arrest some poor schmuck, and call it justice? That's not balance. That's bureaucracy. Nomé's eyes narrowed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Before Theo could respond, Prism's voice crackled through the ship's comms. Captain, we got a problem. Gnome turned sharply. What is it? Unidentified ships approaching. Multiple signatures. They're jamming long-range communication. Nomé's jaw tightened. Pirates again? No, Prism said, its tone unusually grim. This is worse. It's a bounty squad. Theo frowned. Bounty squad? What's that? Gnome glanced at him, her expression grim. Mercenaries. Hired guns who hunt down targets for profit. They don't care about laws or ethics. They just want their reward. Great, Theo muttered. And let me guess. I'm the reward? Likely, Gnome said, striding to the control console. Prism, prepare evasive maneuvers. Engage cloaking systems. Already on it, the AI replied. The ship shuddered slightly as the cloaking field activated, rendering them invisible to most conventional sensors. Gnome studied the incoming signatures on the display, her glowing hair now pulsing rapidly. They've already tracked us this far, she murmured. They must have a tracer. Theo's eyes widened. Wait, you mean someone planted a tracking device? On your fancy spaceship? Impossible, Prism said indignantly. My systems would have detected it. Unless it's on you, Gnome finished, turning to Theo. Me? Theo said, stepping back. Why would I? Oh. He reached into his lab coat pocket and pulled out a small, blinking device. Is this bad? Nomé's eyes widened in disbelief. You had a tracker on you this whole time? I didn't know, Theo said, holding it out as if it might explode. I thought it was, I don't know, a keychain or something. Prism groaned. Humans. Always with the keychains. Gnome snatched the tracker from his hand and crushed it in her armored grip. This just got a lot more complicated. More complicated than space pirates and mercenaries? Theo asked, his voice tinged with sarcasm. That's impressive. Ignoring him, Gnome turned back to the console. Prism, how long until they pinpoint our location? Minutes, the AI replied. They're closing fast. Nomé's mind raced. They couldn't fight off an entire squad of bounty hunters, not in their current state. And surrendering wasn't an option. We'll have to lose them in the asteroid field, she said. Wait, asteroid field? Theo said, his voice rising. As in, flying through a giant cosmic death trap? Do you have a better idea? Gnome snapped. Theo opened his mouth, then closed it. Point taken. The ship banked sharply as Gnome took manual control, guiding them toward the asteroid field visible on the horizon. Massive chunks of rock and ice tumbled through the void, their surfaces glinting in the starlight. Hang on, Gnome said, her voice steady but tense. The Luminous Sentinel dove into the field, weaving between the asteroids with precision. Theo gripped the edge of his seat, his heart pounding as massive rocks hurtled past them. Behind them, the bounty ships followed, their plasma cannons firing sporadically. They're gaining, Prism warned. Nomé's hands flew over the controls. Not for long. She guided the ship toward a particularly dense cluster of asteroids, the hull shuddering as debris grazed its surface. Theo clenched his teeth, every muscle in his body taut. "You do this a lot?" he asked through gritted teeth. "More than I'd like," Nomé replied. A sudden impact rocked the ship, and alarms blared. "Shield integrity compromised," Prism reported. "We can't take another hit like that." Theo's mind raced. "What if we use the reactor?" Nomé glanced at him, incredulous. "The reactor you almost destroyed your lab with?" "Yes," Theo said, standing. "If we can rig it to emit a high-frequency energy pulse, we could scramble their sensors and buy us some time." Nomé hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Fine, but if this goes wrong—" I know," Theo said, rushing toward the reactor. "Just keep us alive until I can make it work." Nomé returned her focus to the controls, dodging another barrage of plasma fire. "Prism, help him. And if he screws up, you have my permission to fry him." "Gladly," Prism replied, floating after Theo. As the bounty ships closed in, Theo worked frantically, his hands a blur as he adjusted the reactor's settings. Newton watched from a nearby shelf, his tail flicking lazily. "Almost there," Theo muttered, sweat dripping down his brow. "Just a few more tweaks." "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Nomé called out. With a final adjustment, the reactor began to hum, its glow intensifying. "Got it," Theo shouted. "Trigger the pulse." Nomé hit the command, and the reactor emitted a blinding burst of energy. The pursuing ships faltered, their systems scrambled. "They've lost us," Prism said. "For now." Theo collapsed against the reactor, exhaling deeply. "You're welcome." Nomé glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Don't get cocky. This isn't over." But as the Luminous Sentinel slipped away into the void, a small, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Maybe, just maybe, this human wasn't as hopeless as she'd thought. Chapter 4: A Leap of Trust. The Luminous Sentinel drifted silently through a nebula, its bioluminescent panels dimmed to avoid detection. Inside, Theo paced the control room, his hands stuffed into his lab coat pockets. Newton followed lazily, tail flicking as if unimpressed by his human's anxiety. "I still think this is a bad idea," Theo said, glancing at Nomé, who stood at the helm, her glowing hair softly illuminating her determined face. "It's the only idea," Nomé replied, her voice steady. "The bounty squad won't stop hunting us until we make this tracer situation irreversible. The nebula will mask our signal, but we need to outsmart them for good." Theo threw up his hands. "Okay, but why does outsmarting them involve me crawling into a maintenance shaft filled with alien space sludge?" "It's coolant fluid," Nomé said, deadpan. "And you're the only one small enough to fit in the shaft." "Small?" Theo huffed, offended. "I'll have you know I'm average height for a human." "Average height. Average judgment," Prism quipped from the console, its orb pulsing mockingly. "If we survive this, maybe the Galactic Council will make a statue of you." Theo Walker, patron saint of reckless science. Theo glared at the AI. "You're really testing my patience, Lightbulb." Newton meowed in agreement, though it was unclear whose side he was on. Nomé interrupted, her voice firm. "Enough. Theo, you know what to do. The modified reactor can emit another pulse, but only if you rewire the power nodes manually. We won't survive a direct confrontation if this doesn't work." Yeah, Theo muttered. "Crawl through the shaft, rewire the thing, don't get fried. Easy peasy." Nomé stepped closer, her stern expression softening just slightly. "I wouldn't send you if it wasn't necessary. You're capable, Theo, even if you don't believe it." He blinked, caught off guard by the rare compliment. For a moment, the tension between them dissolved, and he saw something in her eyes. Something human, or at least familiar. He nodded, swallowing his nerves. "Okay, let's do this." The shaft was as claustrophobic as Theo had feared. The walls shimmered faintly, coated with the alien equivalent of grease, and the faint hum of the ship's systems vibrated through the narrow space. He held a small toolkit in one hand and a flashlight in the other, its beam bouncing as he crawled. Almost there, Prism's voice buzzed through his comm. You'll see the power nodes just ahead. Try not to mess this up. The last time you touched wires, you nearly blew up a planet. Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence, Theo muttered. Finally, he reached the power nodes, a tangled mess of glowing conduits and crystalline panels. His heart pounded as he examined them. He'd need to bypass 3 circuits without overloading the entire system. No pressure. Okay, he whispered to himself, wiping his hands on his coat. I can do this, just like rerouting a toaster, only with significantly higher stakes. Newton's faint meow echoed from the vent opening above, as if offering moral support. Theo grinned despite himself. Thanks, buddy. Carefully, he began working. The first bypass was straightforward, and the second wasn't much harder. But as he reached the 3rd circuit, the ship lurched violently, throwing him against the wall. What the hell was that? Theo shouted. Nomé's voice crackled over the comm. The bounty squad found us. They're firing on the nebula blindly. We're running out of time. Theo gritted his teeth. His hands shook as he tried to steady the final connection. Sparks flew as the conduit resisted his tools. Almost got it. Another impact rocked the ship, and the conduit sparked wildly. Theo yelped as a bolt of energy singed his sleeve. He clenched his jaw, pushing through the pain. Done, he shouted, slapping the panel closed. Nomé, the reactor's ready. Back on the bridge, Nomé slammed her hand onto the activation panel. The reactor whirred to life, its core glowing brighter than ever. Prism, prepare to fire the pulse, she ordered. Coordinates locked, the AI replied. Firing in 3, 2. The pulse rippled through the nebula, an explosion of blue energy that spread like a shockwave. Outside, the bounty ships floundered as their systems failed, their engines sputtering and weapons going offline. They've been neutralized, Prism confirmed. Looks like their navigation systems are fried. They'll be adrift for hours. Nomé exhaled, relief washing over her. Good. Let's get out of here before reinforcements arrive. Theo stumbled onto the bridge, covered in grease and looking thoroughly disheveled. See? Told you I could handle it. Nomé turned to him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, a small, genuine smile. You did well, Theo. He blinked. Wait, was that praise? From the galaxy's most terrifying space cop? Don't push your luck, she said, though her tone was lighter than usual. Newton hopped onto the console, purring as he rubbed against Nomé's arm. She stiffened at first, but then allowed the cat to settle, her glowing hair dimming to a calmer hue. You're getting attached, Theo teased, gesturing to Newton. I'll have to bring him along on all our misadventures. Nomé shot him a look, but there was no real heat behind it. Let's focus on getting you to the Concord station first. After that, we'll see. As the Luminous Sentinel slipped away from the nebula, Theo leaned back in his seat, staring out at the stars. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm despite everything. Nomé, he said after a while, his voice softer. She glanced at him, her expression curious. What? Thanks for not giving up on me. Or blowing me up. Nomé tilted her head, her bioluminescent hair shimmering faintly. You're welcome, Theo. For a moment, the two of them sat in companionable silence, the vastness of space stretching before them. And though their journey was far from over, Theo felt something shift, something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was trust, maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the start of something much more extraordinary.